Hello again. So, I thought I'd talk a little about waypoints and triggers today and just give a couple of use cases for waypoints which are sometimes tricky to get working right and also that can add a significant amount of flexibility to your mission when used in combination together. So, what I'm doing here is I'm assuming that you already know a little bit about waypoints, but if you don't, what you need to do is place a unit or group down, select them, and using the left shift key and the right mouse button, you set waypoints somewhat like that. What you'll find though is you want, say, this group just to walk around in a circle. So if you do that, you can just keep adding waypoints, but there is a waypoint type which is very useful called cycle. So all I've done is go into the that waypoint by double clicking on it, and within the waypoint type there are a variety of different categories. What you're looking for is default and cycle, so at the top of the list, and if you click OK there, you can see it drew that line in there. So if I move that black line there is saying, okay, I'm going to recognise the start point of that unit because it's close to that waypoint, and assume that they're going to walk from that waypoint to the start point and on onwards. If I move the group to a certain distance, you see you no longer get that black line. You get inconsistent results there. Sometimes they'll turn around and walk the other way round. So if you want them to truly walk in a circle, get that black line. And there's other things that are within the waypoint behaviours and states, such as what combat mode you want them in, whether you want them never to fire. So you will put them on that and they will ignore you. It's never really needed to be a combat mode I've ever used, but I can see a couple of reasons why you might use it. Behaviour, so careless, they'll basically ignore the player, and as it says in that, use with caution, player may perceive AIs in this behaviour as defective. Careless is useful if you want someone to basically ignore the player and stick to a road, for example, and just keep driving. But that's really the only use case I can think of. Safe is what I tend to put my sentries and that sort of thing on when they're in a non-combat environment at the minute. That will make them walk around with the weapons lowered. Aware, they'll have their weapons raised. Combat, they'll be taking cover, still with the weapons raised. And stealth kind of explains that as the within the tooltip. So I'm just going to shove these on safe. Formation, well, they're fairly obvious, so I just want this in a nice little patrol-y column. And then speed, slow, normal, fast. Pretty self-explanatory. There are the ability to run scripts. I'm not going to even start covering that. And within here, the next bit that's actually of use is the timer. This will give you a little bit of a loiter time at that waypoint. So if I put a minimum, this is in seconds, so if I put a minimum wait time of 3 seconds, a mid of, I don't know, 4 and a max of 5, it will take somewhere between 3 and 5 seconds. And you can set they don't have to be equidistant between the minimum and max with the mid in the middle. You can actually ignore the mid entirely, or you can slant them one way or another and it will generate a random number weighted towards the middle of that arc. It's sometimes interesting to use effects which will, when you're playing a mission and you want to test something that you can't see, it's kind of handy if you want to make sure that a unit is reaching its waypoint or whatever. You can set a music or a sound and you'll hear it when you're testing, but remember to take them off. And since Flashpoint they've added the ability to actually understand what that noise is. So if I go down here and say pick an alarm and click that, that tells you what that sounds like. Handy. Yeah, it's a bit tricky that. But what you'll see on the next waypoint after that one is none of those settings have followed through, but there's this unchanged, and that will basically mean that that setting will propagate all the way around your loop. If you want them to do different things, you can of course set different waypoints, which will mean that someone can be moving slowly, then speed up, or vice versa, or change formation. It's all within the power of the waypoints. So that's basic waypoints. What I've set here is a bit more of a complicated use case, where I'm using the word use case quite a lot tonight. You've got a group of infantry moving to a vehicle which is also crewed, and they are going to wait for that group to board the vehicle. Then they're going to drive down this road. The infantry is going to get out again. They're extremely lazy, and then they're going to move off to that waypoint down there. The vehicle is then going to move down this road. So you can see that I've brought them together and I'm splitting them apart, and I can make sure that these actions are coordinated by setting it up with this blue line that you can just see there, which is a waypoint activation. So when I right click on a waypoint, I get a connect, and that says set waypoint activation, and that can be set to either a trigger which can kick off the action, and they'll basically be paused up until that trigger condition is met, and we'll cover triggers a little later, or it can be joined to another waypoint of a different group, which means that the two waypoints have to complete together basically. So this group is being forced to move to this unit, and this get in waypoint is the first waypoint I've set for them, and when I set it, if I zoom in, you can see it's basically attached to the vehicle icon. So when I create it, it's a round icon, and if I drag it over, you'll see the cursor change as I drag it over the icon to that little green crosshairs. Let go of it there, and you'll see it's now dotted and more, I suppose it is still round, but it looks more like an octagon to me because of the hashing, and that's saying get in that vehicle, and all they'll do is move in, and the get in waypoint can be used to either crew a vehicle or getting to the cargo, and in this case it's already crewed, so they'll get into the cargo waypoint, and this move waypoint is synchronized to that, so they won't do that until the group has got in. And if we scoot down to the other end, it's a similar sort of situation. I've got two waypoints, one for each group. This one is the infantry waypoint, which is get out, fairly self-explanatory, and this one is transport unload, which says the vehicle is going to wait until the transport group gets out. And again, I've set the waypoint activation between the two, so it will ensure that all of the unit gets out before this vehicle drives off. And then the infantry is going to move down this road to here. And what I did was I set this to go in stealth mode and slow, so it's going to take a long time to get there. So actually what I want them to do is basically get to the end and then go into almost like a all-round defense situation. So I'm going to select that, I'm going to press the left shift and the right mouse button and create another waypoint, and then I'm going to move this back in the order because I want them to move quickly to that point and then get prone. So I'm just going to move it into order 2, and you can see when I drag it there, it's now further back in the order, so they'll run to there and then go prone at that point. So that's the sort of things you can do with the infantry and waypoints. Actually, that's quite a long way, so I'm just going to move all of that back because obviously we want to see this in action. And I've got my player avatar here. So what we'll do is just play in single player. We should have one group kind of mincing around in the field, and another group. So the guys in the field, oops, track IR is not centered, there we go. Guys in the field are here, and you can see they're walking slowly, guns down, in a file sort of formation. The other two seem to have, yeah, there we go, having a bit of a break. Oh, and over here, that unit has got in, and you can see them riding in the back as it passes. And the vehicle has stopped, they're now getting out.
Waiting. Standing by. Copy that.
And now they're all out, and that vehicle's going to drive down that road, and the infantry head off the road, doing the usual armour sort of faffing around. And if you want to test stuff like this, you can always hit the, and there we go, they've got to the end of the row, and boom, basically all-round defence kind of posture. Nice. If you are testing stuff out, you can always use the plus and minus keys to speed time up, like that. So that was a fairly simple example of how that setup can be used. Now, obviously, you could use that to have an enemy quick reaction force mount up, move to the players, dismount and attack. It doesn't have to be a blue 4 unit, obviously, and it doesn't have to be just the one vehicle. But what would you want them to do? You'd only want them to do that when the blue 4 players are in the area. So, triggers. Triggers are this wonderful little flag here, or F3. And there are 4 different triggers in here. Functionally, they're pretty much the same. So I'm just going to pick a 100 meter trigger, and you can see the area it covers is that. If I zoom out, you can see that's 100 meters by 100 meters, and that's a 500. Guess what? It's 5 times as big. And a 10 by 10 gives you this little box. If you're on the ground, you should always be going through a trigger. A trigger doesn't have any size attached to it, but when you double click any of these, you can set the parameters, so you can set the size and so on. There are reasons why you'd use this one and not give it a size, because they can be various types of triggers which don't need a size, and these are used in kind of specific use cases, and I don't think we need to go into that right now, but then you've got the activation, what sets the trigger off, and there's radios, for example. You don't need a size attached to that. It's a radio call using the radio menu. However, for this example, I want to say it's going to be blue 4 and then the activation type. So I've got present, not present. Pretty straightforward. One is if the blue 4 units, if any blue 4 unit is inside the zone, it will trigger. The second is if any blue 4 unit is not in a trigger area, it will go off. And then detected by, and obviously you'd use the enemy faction in that case for your particular scenario. They all do the same thing. They all set the trigger off. So I'm just going to use a blue 4 present setting and set this size to be 5 meters by 5 meters and square, and just click OK, and you can see the size of the area that is. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sync that to that waypoint, that first waypoint. So I'm going to set the waypoint activation of this waypoint here, and what that will do is this unit should move into the vehicle, and that vehicle should stay still, or it may creep forward to this waypoint, but it won't move further until I move into the road and set it off. And in here you've got the repeatable. If you want the trigger to do the same thing multiple times, you click that box. In these sorts of instances you don't need that, because it's only going to do it once. And then you've got whether the server is only going to be looked at, the trigger is only going to be evaluated on the server. In a multiplayer environment, obviously that is very important, and you only want a trigger going off if the server thinks a blue 4 unit is in that area. So you would only you would tick the server only button. And again, you've got a countdown, a bit like the waypoints, but you also have a timeout. So we can have them wait a couple of seconds, or we can have them insist that the player must be within the trigger for 5 seconds for that to work, but we don't need that. So let's have a play of that and see what happens this time. So if I look down the road, you can see the infantry are moving to the vehicle. And there they get in. But that vehicle has not moved. Now I'm going to walk into the trigger area. Have I missed it? That's embarrassing. Ah, there we go. Took a long time for me to get the right area because I said it's so small. But there you go. That's how you can use triggers to activate actions or waypoints of units to do something. Now, obviously, you can use that in a whole variety of ways to anticipate likely avenues of a player approach and set up vehicle patrols or infantry patrols to start moving when the players are near, or in fact do things that you want the players to see or have the ability to see, rather than hiding it all behind a mountain kind of thing. So hopefully that's been of some use. That's a very quick example of a couple of complicated waypoints, some simple waypoints and a trigger.